My next guest, utterly fascinating. His father was a heroin addict and his mother was an alcoholic. So Michael Maisey really found safety at the age of 12 in one of West London's gangs, graduating from shoplifting to armed robbery by the time he was just 16. Michael ended up in Feltham Young Offenders Institute after a poorly planned raid on a corner shop went disastrously wrong. Well, after spending time in and out of prison, he was dependent on drugs. Multiple reform programmes didn't work and followed a failed suicide attempt. He looked for help and, in doing so, has managed to turn his life around. And Michael is with me now. Great to see you. I mean, reading that out, what goes through your mind when you hear that?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago, in all honesty, because I've been sober for 11 years now, so it feels like a completely different life. But, yeah, I mean, it's surreal, really, you know, when you hear it all back and you realise, actually, that was me, that was my life, that I went through all of that stuff. And so a big motivation for me writing the book is, like, I can help a lot of areas here, you know, the mental health, the suicide rate, the reoffending rate, drug addiction. You know, I've been through all of it. I found a way out. It's time for me to go back now and, you know, help others going through it. So, yeah. Well,
it's a fascinating book. And one of the things that struck me was the fact that when you were convicted at the age of 16, you went to a Young Offenders Institute. You weren't worried or scared. You were excited.
Yeah, it's funny because in our community, if you go to prison, it increases your street credibility. So I knew when I came out, I'd almost be treated like a celebrity when I came back to my community. So I was excited to get in there and the credibility I'd get when I was released. But, you know, that was short-lived. Literally, when you get to Feltham Young Offenders and they close the door and you're in a tiny cell and you're there 23 hours every day, it's like, OK, this is it. There's not much more to be excited about now.
We hear a lot of criticism, don't we, about our prison system. A recent report in the last few days really made for very difficult reading. Do you think that we, as a society, think of young people such as yourself in prison and we forget about them? We're not interested in them. Are we guilty of not campaigning hard enough and not wanting a better system of prisons and rehabilitation?
Yeah, I think the people want it. I think the people want rehabilitation. I think the reality is, from my experience, when I've gone into prisons to do talks and to, you know, help people, is that they're very stretched. You know, you could go in there and there won't be enough prison guards to facilitate someone like me coming in off my own free time to help other people. So I think the people want to rehabilitate people like myself who were in crime, but I don't think the resources are really there yet. So.
What was the turning point for you? Who do you credit, or what do you credit with you deciding that actually this wasn't the path I want to go down any further?
Yeah, I mean, it was a combination of two things, Jonathan. It was really, I attempted to take my own life in Feltham Young Offenders, detoxing from heroin addiction, and then at the same time, my mum came to visit me. She got news I tried to kill myself, and it was at that time she'd got sober. And she came to visit me in this visiting room, which normally is a place where inmates like to act really strong and pretend that nothing's bothering them. And I was sitting there with the bruises around my neck and really wounded. And my mum said, "I'm sober." And I just burst into tears in front of the whole visiting room. And it was like this moment in my life where I was like, OK, maybe I'm not this tough guy that I've been pretending to be to the whole world. Maybe there's something more here. And having just one sober parent in my life, which is something I always wanted, was the real turning point for me. You know, I didn't get sober myself age 18, but I did when I was 25.
It just shows you, doesn't it, how important family is for youngsters who are growing up and tempted by this life of crime. You must be very depressed about the number of stabbings that we're hearing about and how gang violence is on the increase.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sad thing that's going on, and I think a huge part of that is, you know, before we got all civilised, there was a rite of passage for men before they became a man in the ancient tribes. There was a rite of passage from boy to man, and I think we've sort of lost that. You know, there's a couple of people out there trying to do that, like the Mankind Project and Band of Brothers, two great, you know, organisations. But I think, you know, a lot of these young men, they need that guidance, they need that support, they need role models, basically, you know, because if you don't have one, if you don't have a father figure, the elder kids in your community will take that role. And that's what happened to me.
So when you see lads that you go and speak to and you see them in that position, what can you do about it? How can you give them that role model that they need?
Yeah, so essentially for me, it's like just hearing them, you know, really hearing them, like, not trying to give them a solution straight away, but really listening to them. And I have to remember for myself, I made a decision at a young age, this world isn't a friendly place. And I created a part of myself which I called a security guard. So everyone met the security guard who basically protected the scared little boy. And so when you go into prisons, that's who you're meeting. You're not meeting the real person. You're meeting an adapted version of themselves that they believe they need to be to survive in the world they grew up in. So I try and just, you know, hear them and meet them with some vulnerability. You know, I think the way...
Yeah, it's hard. How do you break that cycle?
Yeah, I think by leading by example. You know, like I sometimes start my talks in prisons by saying, you know, I feel quite anxious and I feel quite nervous and I feel a bit of fear. And often you see people's ears prick up because in prison you're not meant to show fear, you're not meant to show anxiety. And if I'm there doing it and it's okay, then it sort of opens the door up for them to do it as well. So that's a way that I do it, yeah. And
do you think it works? I mean, do people come up to you afterwards and sort of say, do you know what you said really resonates?
Yeah, well, you know, I've had a lot of really good feedback, you know, and some of the prison guards often there's a queue of inmates lining up to shake my hand in single file, and the prison guard will often say, with all the will in the world, I can't get them to line up in single file. So, you know, I think because I've been there, I'm not in there to make myself feel good. I'm in there to actually help them, to say, I've been there myself and, you know, there's a way out.
Yeah, and you've now got a successful business and life's good.
I've got a successful business. You know, I created a free online program to help people battling with addiction. I also run a men's retreat on my land in Devon. I wrote the book to help other people. But the real goal for me is my 2 children and my wife, you know, being able to be there for my kids when my dad wasn't there for me and being a committed, loyal husband when my father wasn't to my mum. So that's a real goal for me, yeah.
Brilliant. Michael, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. It's great work you're doing. The book is called My Life from Armed Robber to Local Hero. Good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Jonathan.